SAA has assured its customers that both local and regional services will continue uninterrupted. It all comes after the Air Services Licensing Council gave the airline 90 days to disclose details of the public-private partnership for SAA and Takatso Consortium. It's been over a year since government announced Takatso as the preferred strategic equity partner for the struggling airline. Let's get some reaction now and information, joined by independent analyst Khaya Sithole. Very good evening to you. Thank you for your time. SAA only resumed operations late last year after being previously grounded for almost 2 years under business rescue. When the word about the Takatso Consortium deal surfaced, there was some level of optimism, for the staff and customers, but the finer details of this proposed deal and the management changes have never been given.
Yes, it's been a remarkably strange process that has been run by the Department of Public Enterprises, in that they seem to have taken the view that information that is being exchanged between the department, SAA, and the prospective buyers is so market sensitive, they'd rather not disclose it out there. What that has done is that it has left all of us none the wiser about where exactly the deal is, what exactly are the things that are still holding it back from it being finalized, and what needs to be done next in order for us to ensure that we do actually end up with a new, reformed and restructured South African Airways. So that lack of information exchange has proved to be self-defeating for SAA itself, because not only have they refused to share it with the public, it turns out they also haven't shared it with the regulator. And of course, the regulator has had to finally put up its hand and say, actually, we need to know this information, given the fact that it is actually part of the licensing conditions of any airline.
What are perhaps the key areas that the Air Services Licensing Council wants a lot more clarity on?
So one of the main areas is that the licensing authority always needs to be aware of who actually runs and operates an airline. Because given the big public interest associated with you putting 500 people into a box and flying them over different borders, it is important for us to know, for example, who is a safety officer and who exactly runs those operations. So because at SAA we literally have no one running anything except an acting CEO, and everybody keeps resigning from one day to the next, it has become a big operational risk as far as the regulator is concerned, in that they do not know who's actually in charge of anything at SAA. It's also quite important for the regulator to keep checking that whoever runs an airline is able to do so sustainably. So that means that you need to be able to produce financial statements on an ongoing basis, so they can estimate that, look, you're not promising people to fly them next month when you can tell already that you won't be able to exist next month. So those are some of the conditions that SAA has been in breach of, and that's what the regulator has said needs to be corrected in the next 90 days.
So many of the airlines were grounded because of the impact of COVID-19, but for SAA, that appears to not have been the case. It was grounded for business-related matters relating to finance and many of the key routes not being serviced. One would have thought that by now the airline would have its ducks in a row.
Yes, so we do know that their grounding actually predated the COVID-19 pandemic. They were taken into business rescue in early December 2019. And that was a culmination of many years of mismanagement, particularly on the governance side, where SAA had repeatedly sought bailouts from the state on the basis that they just couldn't balance their own books. So their issues actually predated COVID. What happened during COVID is that all other airlines essentially had to be grounded based on global and external factors rather than internally engineered crisis. So of course, now that we've seen the worst of the pandemic and airlines have had to take back to the skies, there's been a mixed bag. So airlines like Comair have not been able to survive, and airlines like SA Express seem to have managed those headwinds, so they are flying. So it's been a mixed story for the aviation sector at large. But I think what's also quite interesting is that the regulator over the past 2 or 3 years has had a very difficult time trying to regulate airlines, where so much of what has happened to them had nothing to do with their own internal matters, but was driven by external factors. And I think the fact that they've now moved on to suspend or threaten to suspend some of these licenses indicates that they believe that anyone who has a problem now is probably dealing with self-inflicted problems rather than global external problems under which they have no control.
Yeah. Should SAA fail to now account and give the finer details around its business model and why it's holding on to routes that it's essentially not operating, what would that mean for the position around the license part of the business and perhaps opportunities for other South African airline operators?
It is a difficult one because we also have to be honest that the regulator is probably not the most honest regulator of them all. Because if you read what they've said now about SAA, is that one of the conditions that SAA has breached is that they haven't been able to provide the regulator with their latest sets of financial statements that have been signed off by the chief executive officer or the auditor. Well, actually, SAA hasn't been able to get audited financial statements for over 4 years now, since 2017. So it is quite surprising that the regulator would mention such a condition when it is clearly a condition that has been repeatedly ignored by SAA, and the regulator did nothing about it. It is also obviously within their rights to then say, well, perhaps that singular breach on its own is not fatal, so therefore we'll keep you flying, provided that you promise to correct it. They haven't told us that they had applied that discretion previously, so we have to call them out on this very strange turn of events where suddenly a condition that just hasn't been met by SAA for close to half a decade is now suddenly something that they threaten them with. It's also quite problematic in that in the aviation sector, we've obviously seen in recent times that we've lost capacity in that Comair and Kulula going down means that there's a gap that the other airlines are going to struggle to fill in the short term. That simply means that you and I will be paying much more to fly, particularly domestically, because that's the market that's been most acutely affected. So this pending suspension of SAA is also quite problematic because if they do actually fail to meet the regulatory requirements, we'd lose even more capacity and you'll literally be left with just Khaya and Lyft and just 2 airlines that are running in South Africa.
But Khaya, in losing capacity, yes, that's one important element, but there's also the part about the council doing a lot of work when it comes to the protection of the consumer and information that consumers wouldn't be privy to.
Yeah, and I think obviously for a lot of people, we always say that the best regulators are the ones that people aren't even aware of, because it simply means that they're regulating the market participants so efficiently, nothing ever comes out to say there's a dispute between market participants and the regulator. And I think for a very long time, this has been that type of regulator where it has been very strict in how it ran the sector. And obviously now that it's come out in the news that they've had to come out and say to these other airlines, Comair, Mango, and now SAA, that we've got a problem, it indicates that we do have a crisis in the sector at large that unfortunately has to be fixed. Otherwise, we're going to be struggling to travel. We're going to be struggling to move around as citizens for a bit more time.
Very well. Thank you so much for weighing in on that conversation. Independent analyst, Khaya Sithole.